declaring a mistrial and actually required the state to go through the whole process once again and conduct a second trial. Now, we learned about this, what went on in the jury room. Normally, what goes on in the jury room is confidential, and neither side actually finds out about it. But we were fortunate in that one of the jurors in that first trial was the daughter of a detective in the prosecutor's office. That fact was disclosed to the defense, so there wasn't any hidden information about the potential juror, and she was accepted by the defense as a juror in the case. Now, jurors are not allowed to talk about the case while the trial is going on, but once the trial was over, this juror, whose father worked in the prosecutor's office, was free to discuss what took place, and she told her father about this woman becoming infatuated with Robert Reldon and not willing to accept any of the evidence against him because she felt that he could never have committed these crimes. And that's how we learned about it, and that's how the first trial ended in a hung jury and a mistrial.
Wow, quite amazing. So he was really a charmer there. Now, on the second mistrial, it is even more bizarre. Tell us about those mail that the jurors got, and also the sideshow where he was trying to plot and kill his only source of income, his rich aunt. Let's go into it.
Yes, Reldon had a very wealthy aunt, and after he came under suspicion for these murders and went to prison for the two daylight burglaries before he was indicted for murder. He plotted to have his aunt killed because he wanted to gain some money and be able to hire the best defense attorneys to defend him. He actually was in communication with Edward Bennett Williams, one of the premier defense attorneys in the United States out of Washington, D.C. Edward Bennett Williams had defended such illustrious people as Frank Sinatra and lots of famous people. And Reldon became his client also, and this is a very expensive defense attorney. Reldon wanted to make sure he had the money to pay for the best defense in the murder case should it be indicted. While he was in prison, he arranged, he used contacts in prison to try to arrange an appointment during visiting hours with a hitman that he could give information about his aunt and have her killed so that he could possibly inherit some of her money. This was his mother's sister. Prosecutors learned of Reldon's intentions when one of the jailhouse people that he contacted turned against him, became really a jailhouse informer, and turned against Reldon and traded the information with the prosecutor's office in the hope of getting information and leniency in their own sentences. And instead of sending a hitman in there, the prosecutor's office sent an undercover detective to actually meet with Reldon in the prison yard. They got his conversations on tape, audio tape.
This is with Gallo, correct? The
this
undercover
was
agent?
Nick Gallo, a very decorated undercover officer, and he got all of this information, played the role of a hitman,
right,
and got all of the information, and they actually were able to prosecute Reldon for plotting to have his aunt murdered. Believe it or not, the aunt was, even after she listened to the tape of Reldon plotting to murder her, simply would not believe that her favorite nephew, Robert Reldon, would even contemplate killing her, and she actually, at the conspiracy to commit murder trial, actually testified in his favor.
Yes, I saw that. Now, there is one little twist to this, because his counsel, I believe Tony Rath,
yes,
he said that he was trying to make a fool of the entire justice system because he came up with the idea and he allowed the the undercover agent to talk to him, and that's how they spinned it, right?
Yes, that was Reldon's defense. His defense was some cockamamie idea that he actually knew that it was an undercover detective, and he was really only trying to embarrass the prosecutor's office because they were after him for these two murders. And The jury didn't buy it.
Right.
Evidently, his wealthy aunt bought it because later on, when she died, she actually mentioned him in her will. So she fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And even though Reldon was convicted of attempting to murder her, later she would die in 2007, approximately 30 years after this trial took place. And she left him almost $9 million in her will, and that's how Reldon became the wealthiest prisoner in the New Jersey prison system.
Unbelievable. Sometimes their blood runs thick and very hard to remove it. That kind of affiliation. Um,
Yes.
Coming back to the Reldon too, that's even okay. Now during this process, the is Reldon 2 is the one where the jury got the letters. Can we go into
Oh,
the
yes.
next phase? Yeah,
Yeah,
can you talk about that?
sure. The second murder trial was perhaps more bizarre than the first in that the same prosecutor handled the second murder trial, and he basically put in the same case with a few different wrinkles. But during that second trial, when Reldon saw the case going against him, mysteriously, several of the jurors got letters delivered to their homes while they were on trial, and the judge was able to find out about it before most of these letters were delivered. But the letters, each of the jurors got an identical letter in the mail, and the letter read as follows. It was a typewritten letter, and it said, the letter contained $100 in cash. And the typewritten note said with the letter, convict this bum, and there's another $900 in it for you. 6 of the jurors got those letters, but fortunately the judge was able to intercept 4 of the letters before they were actually read by the jurors. The effect of this, obviously, with only 6 out of 14 jurors, there were 2 alternate jurors, but with only 6 out of 14 jurors getting these letters, there was not a bribe that was even hopefully from the defendant's standpoint or from anyone's standpoint that was going to convince all 12 jurors who eventually were going to deliberate on the case from agreeing unanimously as to the guilt of the defendant, of Robert Reldon. So it was clear to Mr. Buckley and me as we were researching this. Our theory is that Reldon, with a Confederate, actually caused these letters to be sent to these 6 jurors, and the motive was to create another mistrial. In other words, if 6 out of 14 jurors were disqualified because they were contaminated by a so-called attempted bribe letter, that they would be disqualified, and the judge would have no course at the end of this second lengthy trial, after 60 witnesses had been called, to declare a mistrial. And mistrials, whether it's because of a hung jury or some other reason, always operate to the benefit of the defendant, in that it requires the state to try the case all over again, requires all witnesses to testify all over again, and just creates an atmosphere in which the defendant has perhaps areas in which he can create reasonable doubt, either by a witness not remembering the entire story, whatever. So that was one very curious episode that occurred during the second trial.
Okay, before we go into the third trial, so
yeah,
I read in your book it says that Bernice Bernice Kaplan and Blanche Mate, they testified in his case on the second mistrial, and you said that the prejudicial value far outweighed the probative value of these 2 testimony, and therefore the convictions were reversed and the matter was remanded for new trial. Because because of that particular scenario, that they have to cancel the convictions.
Yes, the prosecutor, I think, overreached a bit in that second trial. He called basically the same witnesses, except he called 2 extra witnesses in the same trial, and he put the two attack victims that I had spoken about earlier, the one, the Teaneck housewife, and the other one that occurred after he got out on parole from the Teaneck housewife conviction, he put them on the stand to testify to the chokeholds that Reldon had used on them, and the prosecutor argued that they were very similar to the chokeholds that were used on these two murder victims.
I
And
see.
the theory was that the similar method of putting the women under his control warranted this evidence to be admitted. Normally, evidence of other crimes is not permissible to be entered into a trial. Evidence of other crimes, and the judge allowed it to be admitted, and that became a fatal error in that once Reldon was convicted in that second trial, his attorneys appealed the conviction, and it went all the way up to the appellate courts, and the conviction was reversed, and that forced the necessity of a third trial.
Hmm. Okay, so yes, now it turns out, and as I was reading through the Reldan 3, that was as bizarre as the second one, but fortunately, Charles Buckley was able to make it a decent conclusion. When we come back, we will talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Dallas Live. I am your host, Dr. RC. The book Charmer is available at Amazon.com and as a Kindle book, and the number to call is 469 307 1642, and we will be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dallas Live. I am your host, Dr. RC. You are listening to Richard Muti and the book he has written, The Charmer, and it is available as a Kindle book at Amazon.com and also at your local bookstores. And this book was written as a co-authored by Charles Buckley. Now, Richard, welcome back to our last segment.
Thank you.
Welcome. We are going to talk about three things in this segment. Number one, how bizarre the third Reldan 3 was, how he was able to use tear gas and escape from the police custody, and what was the final conclusion, and how your co-author Charles Buckley completed the final judgment against Robert Reldan, and also the fights that Susan Reeves' father, Arthur Reeves, did, and how he was able to get all that money not going to this criminal, instead used for a good charitable cause. So let's start from there.
Yes, and Ravi, I may point out that you're covering a lot of the most important points of the book, but in this 1 hour format, we can probably cover less than 20% of the actual details of the book, which are voluminous, and I think you said that they held your interest throughout. The Reldon in that second trial, not actually in the third trial, but in the second trial, just before the jury was to go out and deliberate, actually escaped from the courthouse using tear gas that he had somehow commandeered in the jail before he was brought over to the courthouse. He was able to get his hands on a tear gas canister, and when he was brought to the courtroom early before 9 o'clock, when the lawyers were preparing to make their summations in the case, he sprayed the tear gas at his guard, jumped out of a third-story window of the courthouse, and was able to run off to a nearby parking lot and commandeered a car and escaped into New York State. He was apprehended about an hour later. The police had set up roadblocks. He was apprehended about an hour later and brought back to the courthouse. The jury, of course, never knew about this. They weren't told about his escape because it would have prejudiced them, and it's up to the judge to keep extraneous information like that out of the minds of the jurors. So they were never told about it, and he was eventually convicted in that second trial, and the case was appealed, and he gained the right to a third trial when the conviction was overturned. And my co-author, Charles Buckley, took over the prosecution of the case for that third trial. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show what a great trial prosecutor he was. He's since retired. But he streamlined the case, called, instead of the 60 witnesses that were called in the first two trials, he called only 40 witnesses, and was able to gain a conviction in that third trial without any extra witnesses being called, no serious, no flaws in the case whatsoever, and no appealable issues were presented. The case went in smoothly. Reldon was convicted of both both homicides, and was sentenced after that conviction to life plus 30 years. There was no death penalty in New Jersey at the time of those convictions. Death penalty was inoperative in the mid-1970s based on some U.S. Supreme Court cases. So New Jersey had no death penalty, so Reldon was sentenced to the maximum allowable at the time, which was life for one of the murders and 30 years to life for the other murder. And he was sentenced to consecutive terms in prison for those two murders, to run consecutive to all of the other prison terms that he had been sentenced to for the conviction trying to kill his wealthy aunt.
Okay, very good. So let's go to the money he got from his wealthy aunt after she died, and
Yes.
what was Arthur Reeve did to transfer it not to him but to a charitable institution.
That was a wonderful climax to this story. Arthur Reeve, the father of the second murder victim, Susan Reeve, learned about Reldon's inheritance. His aunt died in 2007, and Reldon inherited this pot of money. And Arthur Reeve learned about it, and he was able to, with some good legal assistance, was able to bring a successful lawsuit against Reldon for the death of his daughter, the wrongful death of his daughter. And Reeve was able to get a $10 million judgment against Robert Reldon, which effectively wiped out most of the money that Reldon had coming to him from his inheritance. There was some minor money left to him to buy food at the prison canteen and stuff like that. But basically, Arthur Reeve, the father of the victim, wanted to deprive Reldon of these funds so that Reldon would not have a good chance of being successful in any parole hearings. Arthur Reeve he's in his 80s now. He's a retired attorney, retired judge, and he has dedicated those funds from that successful lawsuit to his daughter's alma mater, Hollins College in Virginia. That's where his daughter had graduated from just before she met her untimely end. and all of that money now goes to the education of young men and women at the college. And Arthur Reeve has been tremendously supportive of this book. He feels that it told his daughter's story very clearly and carefully, and he actually has purchased 25 copies of the book to give to his family and friends. And he was very cooperative in our writing of the book. And actually, I included some pictures of him and his wife and his daughter. The book has a photo section that shows pictures of all of the main characters in the book.
Now, where is the photo section of this book? It's towards the end.
It's toward the end, yes. In the electronic version of the book, the photo section is near the end. In the print edition of the book, it's about in the middle of the book.
I see. Let me. Towards the end, right? Okay.
Yes, yes, at the very end of the book in the electronic version, in the Kindle version.
Yeah, the Kindle version. Okay, if I. Yeah. Okay, there are.
Yeah, there are all sorts of photographs. There's over 16. There's 16 pages of photographs in the book. And you know, the reaction that you had to the book, Ravi, is the reaction that everyone who reads it seems to give us. That it's a tremendous read. Reads almost like a novel, but it's true. It's not fiction. It's true. And the book has been quite successful. We're still, believe it or not, more than a year and a half after the book came out. Tomorrow night we have a presentation on our book tour. We've had more than 30 stops on our book tour for this book. It's been well received wherever we go. Buckley and I have a book appearance and presentation tomorrow night in New Jersey, and we have another one on October 12th, and several more before the year is out.
Yeah, I see a picture of Reldan when he is 68 in 2009.
Yes.
And also when he was very young. And so I'm showing to my audience the two pictures, so
yes.
They can see those, and also a bunch of other pictures. Ladies and gentlemen, you should buy this book because it's a very fascinating book, and there are so many antiques during these mistrials. It's hard to keep all of them. That's why I missed. I thought that the bomb and the escape was on the second one, right? I thought it was on the third one. Very good. So the one good ending to this is Arthur Reeve, similar to O.J. Simpson's case, was able to transfer all that money for a good cause. So that is the silver lining on this very tragic story of what Robert Reldan did to all his victims. Richard, it's a fascinating hour for me. I don't know about you.
I enjoyed it very much. I have a Dallas connection, by the way. My daughter lives in Dallas, and
okay.
I'm sure she will listen. She's actually running. She just ran in the Berlin Marathon in Berlin, Germany, this weekend. So she's not home right now to listen live, but I'm sure she'll listen when she gets back home.
I see. Okay, very good.
Live in Dallas. Yes.
We will be rerunning this, and when you come to Dallas, I think we should go on fly.
I hope so.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Dallas Live, and our host was our guest was Richard Muti, and his best-selling book, The Charmer, an award finalist for the USA Book News 2012 Best Book Competition, and it's available at Amazon.com and as a Kindle book. It is a very good reading, and I really enjoyed it. Richard, thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.
Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back.